President of the Security Council gives the floor to the representative of Israel.
Mr. Benjamin, before I begin, I have noticed that when you give the floor to any member state, you just say that you give them the floor. But when it comes to Israel, you say, and I quote, the presidency or the president gives the floor. I don't understand what is the reasoning for that, and maybe you can let me know why you make that distinction between Israel and any other member state that appears in front of this council.
Did you finish your statement?
No, I haven't started. I just wanted to know why you make the distinction when you give me the floor for the last months, since you are the president of the Security Council, and I thought it was a mistake, but now I saw that it's not a mistake, and there's something behind it. So maybe you have something against my country, but as president of the council, you should put your personal thoughts or feelings aside when you preside over the council.
We are chairing this council, and the presidency of the Security Council gives the floor to the representative of Israel. You have the floor, sir.
Mr. President, I'd like to thank you for convening today's council meeting, supported by Algeria in a national capacity, as well as by Pakistan and Somalia. The objective being to discuss the disastrous situation of children in Gaza. We're grateful to Mr. Fletcher for taking up our invitation and participating in this briefing. We're also grateful to Ms. Bisan Natil, thanks to whom we heard a story about the tragic pages in the history of the lives of Palestinian children. Mr. President, the vile war in Gaza, involving the most intensive bombardment of civilians since World War II, and with the sense of humanitarian access, has run roughshod over the lives of children in the enclave. Back in November of 2023, the Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, called Gaza a graveyard of children. An assessment of the horrific consequences of massive attacks on civilians was issued by a number of Security Council members during the informal visit to the Rafah crossing in December of 2023. And back then, already, in Egypt, we saw a hospital on the border with Gaza, and there already we saw maimed children. Thanks to the efforts of Egyptian and Qatari mediators, who at a late stage were joined by representatives of the new U.S. administration, at last an agreement was reached. The agreement calls not only for a ceasefire, but also for an increase in the volumes of foodstuffs, fuel, and medicine supplied to the residents of Gaza. However, there is little cause for celebration so far. The humanitarian catastrophe raging in the enclave for over 15 months now hasn't gone away. What remains beyond the purview of the agreement are safe and unimpeded deliveries of assistance using all routes and insufficient quantities. Israel's military presence in the enclave continues. The Israeli military instance control over the border crossing in Rafah. As far as we understand, European monitors will be tracking the use of that crossing, thus assuming part of the responsibility for the humanitarian situation in Gaza. It's noteworthy that Europeans, who very much like to cast themselves as defenders of human rights, are not calling for those who are killing children in Gaza to be brought to justice. In fact, a number of Europeans haven't even stopped supplying weapons to Israel. The war in Gaza has truly become a litmus test, which has showed up the West's true approach to the defense of human rights. As things stand, we do not have definitive data about the number of boys and girls who have perished, because organizations working in the field cannot collect quickly enough mortality data that is not linked to wounds, but rather mortality as a result of hunger, dehydration, poor sanitation, or disruption to the work of the health sector. Collapsed buildings have not been cleared. Under the rubble, there might be thousands of bodies. Nonetheless, thanks to a recent study published by The Lancet, we do know that out of the 28,257 deaths which occurred between the 7th of October 2023 to the 30th of June 2024, for which there is age and sex data, of those 28,257, 16,699, that's roughly 59%, are women, children, and the elderly. According to UNICEF, the overall number of deaths, children's deaths since the start of the conflict, is at least 14,500. Over 17,000, roughly 17,000, are unaccompanied minors or children who have been separated from their parents. Roughly 1 million children were compelled to leave their homes. In the first 7 days of this year alone, 74 children died. In late December, early January, 8 infants in tent camps died as a result of hypothermia. Many children were also maimed. In 2024, as a result of explosive weapons being used in the Gaza Strip, on average, 475 children a month, that's 15 children a day, became disabled, receiving serious injuries to their limbs or hearing problems. According to UNMAS, the UN Mine Action Service, if the war were to end today, the risk of death and being maimed for children in Gaza would remain for at least 14 years. That's how long it will take to clear the enclave of unexploded ordnance. Is it worth mentioning the fact that children always were and remain the main victims of mine contamination, in part owing to children's natural curiosity? Today, we will celebrate International Day of Education. The world over, people will be talking about the fact that education is a key component of sustainable development, that everyone has a right to education. In this Palestinian enclave, in the first week of 2025 alone, schools, which people are now using inter alia as shelters, 5 attacks were waged on such schools. Dozens of children suffered, at least 3 died. Gaza's education system has been paralyzed for a long time now. Assessments of the damage and destruction done to schooling facilities vary, including it's up to 96% as of September 2024 and up to 100% in the north of Gaza as of December 2024. That's how many schools have been destroyed or damaged. And we're not talking about minor damage. Ceilings have collapsed. There are holes in the walls of school buildings. 625,000 students have missed an entire school year, and now they're being compelled to miss another one. It will be a miracle if these children will be able to return to school at some point. The healthcare situation has also been decimated, which has had negative repercussions on children's access to medical services. According to an OHCHR report issued on the 31st of December, that report contained a confirmation of the fact that attacks on medical facilities in Gaza have been systematic and structured. By June of 2024, 22 out of 38 hospitals had stopped operating. According to WHO data, only 38% of primary healthcare centers are functional. Under such conditions, what has again been proven to be irreplaceable and unique is UNRWA. UNRWA's activities in the occupied Palestinian territory is under risk of being banned owing to the laws adopted by the Knesset. These decisions are not only in violation of international humanitarian law, they also violate the 1946 Convention on Privileges and Immunities of UN Personnel. And in fact, it is the Secretary General of the United Nations who is the guarantor of the implementation of this convention. Such decisions are also at odds with relevant UNGA decisions, as well as the conditions for Israel's membership in the UN. That is the implementation of two flagship UNGA resolutions. Resolution 181, the partition plan of Palestine, and 194 about Palestine refugees. For over 70 years, UNRWA staff have worked under inhumane conditions, often risking their lives, to implement the agency's mandate, which includes the provision of educational, healthcare, social, microfinancing, and emergency assistance services to Palestinians in need. The mandate also includes the improvement of infrastructure and the living conditions of refugees in camps. For the last 15 months, over the course of the last 15 months, 265 UNRWA personnel have died. This is a record loss of UN staff in the entire history of the organization. The stoppage of UNRWA's work would have catastrophic consequences for the most vulnerable groups, first and foremost children. We simply cannot allow that to happen. Under such conditions, this ceasefire should be used to urgently scale up humanitarian assistance to the region, placing the emphasis on the particular needs of children. Aside from efforts aimed at rebuilding infrastructure, delivering food and medicine, we also need to ensure unimpeded evacuation from the enclave of children who require specialized assistance. They should be evacuated together with their parents or guardians, as well as granted unimpeded return home. Another component of the agreement that was reached is an exchange of all detainees, among which there are children. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. The issue of arbitrary detentions by the Israeli authorities of Palestinian children existed long before the events of 7th October 2023. They were subjected to so-called administrative detention, just like adults. As a result, they ended up behind bars for unspecified periods of time without being charged with anything. We shouldn't forget about repeat detention of minors who were released following a similar deal reached in November of 2023. The war in Gaza has not only disfigured the fates of children and adults, it has also torn apart the fabric of society, delaying until further notice the start of genuine peaceful coexistence of the two peoples. Even those children in Gaza who were lucky enough to remain alive, to not be disabled, they will also need years in order to fix their psychiatric health and to learn to live like their peers are living in other regions not affected by conflict. Another acute issue is Palestinian orphans, of which there are over 20,000. What does fate have in store for them? What can the UN do to ensure that the lives of these children are not broken? Sustainable stabilization of the situation in Gaza is the only option. There is no alternative if we want to secure the future of Palestinian children and thus of the Palestinian people as a whole. We believe that the Security Council is simply duty-bound to keep this issue, children, front of mind in the context of the situation in Gaza. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for the statement. And I now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you, Undersecretary General Tom Fletcher, for your briefing, and to Ms. Bisan Natil for your moving remarks. Colleagues, a ceasefire and hostage release deal were long overdue. The United States, Qatar, and Egypt-led mediation finally led to an agreement to end the conflict Hamas set into motion on October 7th, 2023. The deal halted the fighting in Gaza, and it will reunite all of the remaining hostages with their families and will surge much-needed humanitarian assistance to Palestinian civilians. We remind this council that Hamas still holds two children hostage, Kafir and Ariel Bibas, who were violently taken from their home on October 7th. 2-year-old Kafir has marked both of his birthdays in Hamas captivity. Since Hamas's barbaric attack started this conflict over 15 months ago, The suffering of Palestinian civilians, the deaths and the injuries and the displacement, has been immense. The suffering extends to Gaza's youngest victims, the Palestinian children who were caught in the crossfire, lost family, missed school. No one benefits from this crisis. Now is the time to ensure critical aid reaches those in need throughout Gaza in accordance with the ceasefire deal the United States, Qatar, and Egypt secured. We urge countries to support this effort through additional funding and resources to help quickly scale up much-needed humanitarian aid. We must ensure that Hamas is not permitted to seize, divert, or profit from this assistance, and that if it does so, it is reported immediately. Hamas cannot be allowed to reconstitute. Hamas should have no role in the governance of Gaza. It should not be rewarded for having launched the brutal attack that started this conflict or for its deplorable behavior in the interim. We must instead seize this opportunity to reshape the region in a way that affords its people a path forward. Gaza must be demilitarized for the sake of Israel's security and to provide a brighter future for the Palestinian people. Hamas, along with its benefactors in Tehran, should not have a say in the region's future. We have already seen Hamas weaponize the suffering of Palestinians by using civilian infrastructure, including schools and hospitals, to store caches of weapons, house fighters, and coordinate attacks against Israel. We are concerned about reports that Hamas held returned Israeli hostages in UN shelters in Gaza during their prolonged captivity. It is vital for a full investigation to assess these very serious allegations. At the same time, Hamas plays the victim and makes false appeals to the international community on behalf of Palestinians, while at the same time employing tactics that put them in danger. Israelis need to feel secure within their own borders, and Palestinians deserve a future to look forward to with freedom, dignity, and security. We must work together to counter the nefarious influence of Tehran and its terrorist proxies, whose actions have destabilized the Middle East for decades. We can instead work with like-minded partners to create a Middle East that is more integrated, prosperous, and peaceful. The United States is strongly committed to implementing the ceasefire agreement so that hostages can return home and the people of Gaza can look forward to a brighter future under new leadership. This is the only path forward. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for the statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of China.
主席，
President, I thank US Chief Fletcher and Ms. Natil for their briefings. Children are the greatest victims of armed conflict. During the 15-month-long Gaza conflict, at least 17,000 Palestinian children have been killed, with more than 600,000 plunged into an unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe. Those children who should have been sitting in the classrooms learning with books in their hands had instead found themselves facing forced displacement again and again and huddling under the rubble to seek shelter from the bombardment. Scenes of children dying in front of their family and images of children reduced to skin and bones due to malnutrition have broken our heart. All this should have never happened and must not be allowed to continue. The international community must act to put an end to the suffering of the children of Gaza. First, a durable ceasefire in Gaza. Once the ceasefire that began on January the 19th has been fulfilled, there must be no resumption of fighting, and the children must not once again be put under gunpoint or subjected to gunfire. The current ceasefire should form the basis for a permanent ceasefire rather than a pause before a new round of offensive. We are gravely concerned about reports that children were shot and killed by Israeli forces in Rafah the day after the ceasefire came into effect. We strongly call for the continuous and full implementation of the three-phase ceasefire agreement. Second, expand humanitarian assistance in Gaza. Children in Gaza have long been deprived of the basic necessities for survival, such as food and medicine, and there are even cases of newborn babies being frozen to death. We call on Israel to fulfill its obligation under the international humanitarian law as the occupying power by opening all border crossings, lifting restrictions on entry of goods, and guaranteeing large-scale access of humanitarian supplies into Gaza and their safe and orderly distribution. We call on the international community to scale up their assistance to Gaza. Third, guaranteeing education for children in Gaza. Education is indispensable for the healthy development of children. 15 months of indiscriminate bombing have obliterated the conditions of living in Gaza, with education being completely disrupted. The international community should support the expeditious commencement of reconstruction in Gaza to restore people's livelihoods and provide children with a healthy environment in which to grow up. For years, UNRWA has been providing basic public services such as education in Gaza, and as such has the capacity and should play a major role in the post-war reconstruction of Gaza. We once again call on Israel to cease its suppression of the agency and to repeal the relevant bill as soon as possible. Fourth, accountability for violations against children. Protection of civilians in armed conflict is an obligation under international law and not targeting children even more so. The Security Council resolution has clearly identified 6 grave violations against children as prohibited actions. However, large amount of reporting has shown that children in Gaza have suffered grave violations during the conflict, and the annual report of the Secretary General has also listed relevant perpetrators. We call for investigations and accountability for all violations against children in all conflicts and support the continued focus on the children of Gaza by the Council's Working Group on Children and Armed Conflict. The fundamental approach to allow Palestinian children to grow up in a safe and healthy environment is through the implementation of the two-state solution and the realization of a comprehensive, just, and lasting solution to the question of Palestine. The international community must act with an utmost sense of urgency to promote the restart of the political process for the two-state solution. China is ready to continue to make unremitting efforts with all parties to promote an early realization of peaceful coexistence between Palestine and Israel and a lasting peace and security in the Middle East, so that the children of both Palestine and Israel can be free from the horrors of war and grow up freely under the sunshine of peace. Thank you, President.
Colleagues, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Children, regardless of where they are born, have the inalienable right to a dignified life, to education, and to a joyful, safe, and secure childhood. Children in Gaza should not be an exception. Children in Gaza should not be an exception. Let's unite our efforts for a better future for children in Gaza. I thank you. I resume my function as President of the Council. I now give the floor to the permanent observer of the observer state of Palestine. You have the floor, sir.
Mr. President, I would like to thank the Russian Federation with the support of Algeria, Pakistan, Somalia, and Sierra Leone for convening this important meeting to discuss the situation of the Palestinian children in the Gaza Strip and to highlight their plight and the urgent need to ensure their protection and care. Today, with the ceasefire,
أن يكون
which should become permanent, it may be time for the Security Council to visit the devastated Gaza Strip, to witness firsthand what befell our people and our children owing to what Israel has perpetrated, including war crimes, crimes against humanity throughout 15 months of genocide and 17 years of an unjust blockade. To also witness firsthand the results of the culture of impunity, of double standards and immunity, the lack of accountability enjoyed by Israel as an occupying power, unjustly and without reason. Mr. President, allow me as well to thank the Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Mr. Tom Fletcher, for his comprehensive briefing. We also thank all the UN personnel operating on the ground to provide relief to our people. To Bisan Natil, our daughter from Gaza, I say, we are proud of you. We are proud of the young men and women of Palestine. We couldn't be prouder when our children in Gaza speak of Gaza before the Security Council and the world, especially after this long absence imposed on you by the occupation. You have conveyed with hope and humanity your suffering and the horrors of what happened to you. I would like to thank you for your testimony on behalf of all the children of Palestine. Our hearts were bleeding throughout this heinous genocide. We could hear your pulse coming from Beit Hanun, Beit Lahia, Jabalia, Gaza, Al-Wusta, Deir al-Balah, Khan Yunis, and Rafah. We know that you and your children have been suffering, have been bearing the unbearable, the injustice, the aggression through no fault of your own. You were facing the Israeli machine, the killing machine, the destruction, the displacement, the ethnic cleansing that seeks to thwart your attempts to survive the bombardment and killing, to avoid being lost under the rubble, to survive detention, disease, fear, starvation, thirst, the summer heat, and the winter cold. We recognize the scale of pain and oppression you have endured, the scope of the catastrophe that befell you. We recognize how difficult it is to heal as a people, but we also recognize your unwavering determination and resolve to go back to life, to resist death surrounding you from all sides. We will build on this resolve and on this hope, which may be scarce in these difficult times, especially that funeral homes are still open and that search
والمفقودين
remains and for the displaced is ongoing. I wish you, our people in Gaza, a safe return to your life, to your homes, or what remains thereof. A safe return to your families, to your loved ones, to your friends, or whomever remains of them. We will be with you. We will be the hand that builds, that heals. We will listen to your ambitions and to your legitimate dreams. We will always convey your voice until this criminal Israeli occupation of our people and of our land ends. Mr. President, in this context, we reaffirm the willingness and readiness of the Palestinian government to shoulder its governmental responsibilities in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank, to provide relief and development services to our people in the Strip, which is part and parcel of the territories of the State of Palestine. In line with the government's plan for relief and early recovery, and the emergency response for the Gaza Strip, which was submitted by the Prime Minister Dr. Mohammed Mustafa to His Excellency President Mahmoud Abbas, and which includes guaranteeing the safe return of the displaced to their homes, the provision of treatment to the wounded and the sick, the rehabilitation of the disabled, and preparing for a comprehensive reconstruction phase, including the resumption of the services of education, health, and infrastructure, controlling the crossings and the borders, achieving economic recovery and social recovery. And in this, we will depend on the expertise of our sons and daughters from the Palestinian people capable of building a better future. And here there is a need to call upon the Israeli occupation to immediately release thousands of medical, journalistic, and academic Palestinian personnel who were abducted by Israel from the Gaza Strip and who are being subjected to the most severe forms of torture in the Gaza cannot recover without the return of its sons who were abducted by Israel from the Gaza Strip, such as Dr. Hussam Abu Safiya and Dr. Ahmed Mahanna, medical personnel and technical personnel. We look forward to cooperating and coordinating with friendly and sisterly countries in all areas to provide aid and assistance to our people. We reaffirm the role of the United Nations, including the pivotal role of UNRWA, which is irreplaceable, especially at this critical stage. Hence the need to compel the Israeli occupation not to obstruct the work of UNRWA in the occupied Palestinian territories, including East Jerusalem. We call upon the international community to enable UNRWA to reopen its schools in the Gaza Strip and to equip it to welcome thousands of children, to resume formal education, and to reach every young boy and girl evenly and safely. We all know that schools provide some sort of protection to children from the scourge of wars, because schools provide psychological and recreational support to children. We cannot wait any longer. We should immediately resume education at all its levels in the Gaza Strip. Mr. President, Israel has been waging air raids on houses of civilians in Gaza indiscriminately. It has been adopting carpet bombardment using hundreds of tons of bombs. These bombardments killed more than 14,000 children, with more than 20,000 missing under the rubble of their homes, their shelters, or in mass graves. Tens of thousands of children are suffering severe burns and permanent injuries. They have been maimed. Israel left thousands of children orphans. Israel besieged the Gaza Strip and imposed the policy of starvation using war, it preventing the delivery and distribution of relief and medical assistance to the civilian, in violation of all the moral, legal, and political standards, including relevant Security Council resolutions. In the West Bank, Israel entered with its military armored vehicles into our homes, into our schools and neighborhoods. It has killed and arrested our children. And this occupation and the settlers' terrorism is expanding to engulf every city, every neighborhood, in Jenin and its camp, in Tulkarm, in Nablus, in Ramallah, in Kalkilia, in Beit Lahem, in Hebron. They are displacing, bombarding, detaining, burning, looting, and building settlements in a blatant violation of international laws and instruments without any accountability. We call for keeping the IDF on the UN list of abusers of the rights of children in armed conflicts, until this occupation ceases committing crimes against our children. We also call upon countries to prohibit the delivery of weapons to the Israeli occupation army, to compel it to respect international law, and to ensure protection for our children. We cannot accept this fate, and we cannot accept that the fate of our children will be either a grave in the Gaza Strip or a detention center in the West Bank or a displacement in East Jerusalem. It is unacceptable for our children to live today the same harsh life we lived in our childhood owing to the ongoing Israeli occupation throughout the decades without any prospect to end it. This cycle of violence should end immediately. This occupation, which is robbing us of our children, robbing us of our youth and of life, should end immediately. It is time for us, for our children, to live a life free from the Israeli occupation and its aggressions. It is time for a Palestinian generation that doesn't live under occupation. It is time to end the war irreversibly and to end the blockade irreversibly. It is time to release all our Palestinian children that are being held by Israel in the Israeli detention and torture centers, and to guarantee that Israel will not detain them again. It is time for our wounded and sick children to receive treatment and the necessary medical care, especially those who lost their limbs and who are in need of artificial limbs and who need rehabilitation to adapt with this new life that was imposed on them. I call upon you to join us in our efforts to achieve justice, peace, and security in our region. This can only be achieved by ending the unlawful Israeli occupation of our land, pursuant to the advisory opinion of the ICJ, to achieve justice and to hold accountable the perpetrators before international tribunals, to achieve the independence and sovereignty of the State of Palestine and its full membership in the United Nations, so that our people can exercise their right to self-determination, and so that our children can be born and raised in peace and security and can fulfill their dreams, build their future, and live in freedom and dignity. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of the observer state of Palestine for his statement. The President of the Security Council gives the floor to the representative of Israel.
Mr. Benjamin, before I begin, I have noticed that when you give the floor to any member state, you just say that you give them the floor. But when it comes to Israel, you say, and I quote, the presidency or the president gives the floor. I don't understand what is the reasoning for that, and maybe you can let me know why you make that distinction between Israel and any other member state that appears in front of this council.
Did you finish your statement?
No, I haven't started. I just wanted to know why you make the distinction when you give me the floor for the last months, since you are the president of the Security Council, and I thought it was a mistake, but now I saw that it's not a mistake, and there's something behind it. So maybe you have something against my country, but as president of the council, you should put your personal thoughts or feelings aside when you preside over the council.
We are chairing this council, and the presidency of the Security Council gives the floor to the representative of Israel. You have the floor, sir.
Esteemed colleagues, I must first ask, has this council ever paused to consider the plight of Israeli children? Too many Israeli children were mutilated, tortured, and murdered on October 7. Innocent lives stolen by the brutality of Hamas terrorists. 30 children were kidnapped from their homes, ripped from their families, and taken into the depths of Hamas's terror tunnels. Tens of thousands of Israeli children have been displaced, their homes destroyed, their schools closed, their lives shattered. No one at the UN nor any of its agencies have said enough about them, let alone lifted a finger to help them. And what about the children who have spent their formative years under the constant stream of Hamas rocket fire? Imagine growing up with the sound of sirens, given just seconds to find shelter, with the knowledge that every moment of peace could be destroyed in an instant. Tens of thousands of children have grown up knowing that at any moment a Hamas rocket could kill them. This is a reality for Israeli children. The trauma they have endured is beyond imagination. Yet, where is the Council's compassion? Where are the urgent sessions? Where is the outrage? Instead, we meet here today to discuss only the children of Gaza. While their suffering is real, this discussion is dripping with fake outrage and political agenda. Every member of this council, including those who called for this discussion, knows who bears responsibility for their situation. It is Hamas, not Israel, that has turned Gaza into a war zone. It is Hamas, not Israel, that uses children as human shields. It is Hamas, not Israel, that places its terror infrastructure in schools, hospitals, and civilian neighborhoods. But time and time again, this council chooses to ignore these facts, choosing to vilify the democratic country that goes to every possible length to protect innocent lives. On October 7, Hamas made a deliberate choice to massacre our people. They knew, as did everyone in this chamber, that their actions would provoke the response it has. They knew they were putting their own people in harm's way, and still they carried out their atrocities, hiding behind civilians and daring Israel to act. Today's discussion is an affront to common sense. Those who truly care about the children of Gaza must condemn Hamas unequivocally. Anything less is hypocrisy. Hamas has stolen countless childhoods and poisoned those children's minds. They have turned schools into training grounds for terror, where children are taught to glorify violence and hate. We have all seen the images, and also in the last week, of young Gazan children wearing the Hamas headbands, waving guns in the air. That is the future Hamas wants for Gaza's children. Imagine the level of hatred they have ingrained in those countless young boys. These are not isolated examples. This is systematic indoctrination. Hamas has robbed generations of their innocence and their future. If this council truly cared about the children of Gaza, it would have condemned that indoctrination long ago. But instead, we hear only silence. Let's be honest. What future will the children of Gaza have with Hamas in power? None. They will remain tools for Hamas's terror, canon fodder for their murderous aims. They will grow up in a society where hatred is celebrated, where violence is glorified, and where life is cheap. Is this the future you want for them? Because it is the future you enable when you refuse to hold Hamas accountable. Contrast this with what could have been. And I want to remind you, in 2005, Israel made a painful decision, and an unprecedented one, to withdraw from Gaza. We removed every single Israeli citizen and soldier, so-called settlements, settler, occupation, blockade, you name it as much as you want. We moved all of them, uprooting entire communities in the hope of giving the Palestinians a chance at peace and prosperity. We left everything there, entire communities. What did Hamas do with this opportunity? They turned Gaza into the world's largest terror base, diverting resources meant for the people and their needs to build rockets and tunnels. They could have created a thriving future. You all speak about the future for the children. They had the opportunity, a Singapore on the Mediterranean. Instead, they chose destruction. The children of Gaza could have had a future filled with opportunity. Instead, they are trapped in a cycle of violence and despair, all because of Hamas, not because of Israel. Israel's commitment to minimizing harm to civilians is unmatched. We take extraordinary measures to protect innocent lives, even when Hamas makes it nearly impossible. We put our own soldiers at greater risk to spare lives on the other side. Yet Hamas exploits this humanity, embedding themselves deeper among civilians, using their homes as bunkers, their schools as weapon stores, and their hospitals as command centers. This is not a moral equivalence. This is a moral abomination. So I ask this council today, if you truly care about the children of Gaza, why do you remain silent in the face of such evil? Why do you not demand an end to Hamas's indoctrination and exploitation of children? Why do you not support efforts to dismantle their terror network and free Gaza from Hamas's grip? Algeria, you speak so highly. You want Hamas to stay? There will be no future for the kids of Gaza. If you genuinely care about the children of Gaza, you would join Israel in working to create a future of hope, not hate. That future is possible but only if Hamas is removed from power. Imagine a Gaza where children go to school to learn, not to be indoctrinated, not with guns. Imagine a Gaza where resources are used to build playgrounds, not tunnels, where hospitals heal rather than hide weapons, where families can live without fear. This is not a pipe dream. It is a reality that could be achieved if Hamas's reign of terror ends. The international community must make a choice. Stand with the children of Gaza or stand with those who use them as shields. You cannot support the children of Gaza and support Hamas at the same time. By refusing to confront the truth about Hamas, the Council is not just failing Israel or the children of Gaza, you are failing humanity. This Council was created to uphold peace and justice, but if this inaction continues, terror will continue to flourish. Israel will continue to do everything in its power to protect its people and to seek a better future for all children in the region. But make no mistake, that future cannot and will not include Hamas. Colleagues, perhaps you have forgotten about little Kfir Bivas, but I promise you we haven't. Kfir Bivas was 9 months old when he was ripped from his bed, along with his 4-year-old brother Ariel and his parents Shiri and Yarden. He has remained in the darkness of Hamas's terror dungeons. Since then, we have received no word, nothing about his condition. No visits from the Red Cross, no offers of assistance, and no outrage from the UN. Just a few days ago, Kfir Bivas should have celebrated his 2nd birthday, but for this little boy, there have been no celebrations. Kfir has not had the opportunity to celebrate a single birthday. He has known only captivity and suffering. Do you not hear the cries of Israeli children? Do you not feel the pain of Israeli children? Do you not see their tears? If you did, if you cared for anything other than political agendas, this session would discuss Kfir Bivas and all those Israeli children still suffering as well. Our children, every single one, deserve more than your silence. They deserve more than your indifference. They deserve their lives back.
The presidency of the Security Council thanks the representative of Israel for the statement.